Did you know that subtle things that we experience during the day affect how we think, how we feel, and even how we behave during the course of the day? In today's episode, we're going to talk about how we can use priming and other strategies to help us get more energy, motivation, and positive outcomes. Coming up. Hello, I'm Fernando Sosa, and you're watching Mindset of Steel live show. In this show, we encourage you to crush your limiting beliefs, punch fear in the face, and take massive action in your personal life and your business by focusing on the 80% psychology and 20% strategies. Today is episode number 10, so I'm fired up. I'm very excited that we're on episode number 10, going on 2 months now of our weekly live show. And today's episode, we're going to talk about the daily ritual of priming and how to identify healthy thoughts. And we're going to have a special guest, licensed psychotherapist and certified cognitive behavioral therapist. He's going to be joining us in a couple of minutes, and we're going to get some insights from him as well. He's going to share a lot of good information. Now, priming is something that I picked up a few months ago, and in particular in an event that I attended with Tony Robbins. And I am going to share with you something that I picked up in that event. But before getting into what priming is, I wanted to share with you just the word priming itself. If you look up the definition of priming, this is a definition. I just looked it up online, and it says a substance that prepares something for use of action. So there's different types of priming, but the key thing here is that I wanted to highlight is the word prepare. So priming has to do with preparing something for something else, just preparing. So in terms of identifying healthy thoughts and just the mindset and psychology aspect of it, to prime is basically you're preparing yourself mentally to do something. And sometimes this happens whether you realize it or not. It's possible to change the way you think and the way you behave by looking at certain things. And these things that you're looking at, sometimes you don't even notice it. And the thing about this is that this thing about priming is used by many companies in advertising and different areas, different industries. There's an example about priming that I wanted to just briefly mention. In Spain, I think actually all over the world, but I saw an example that in Spain, the Spain train system, they did an experiment that in order to reduce crime, they played classical music in the train station. And I found that interesting when I looked at it. And then I looked it up, and that actually has been done in different places all over the world, that they play music. And I think that could be argued that some people argue that that's not necessarily priming, but that they're just diverting people that don't like classical music, not to basically hang around the train station, and therefore they're not committing the crimes. So, but the idea is still fascinating to me, that they introduce classical music just to prevent, like you see here, to reduce antisocial behavior. And it actually, according to them, it worked. And again, this has been done in different parts of the world. The other thing is that I know that advertising agencies, they use priming as well. And they use it in a way that basically they show you some image, right? And you may or may not even realize that the image that they're showing you primes you into taking some action, whether it's, and ideally for them, it's buying their product. I saw another experiment about a person holding a hot cup of coffee versus a cold drink. And depending on, and they made an experiment with different people. Some people grabbed the hot cup of coffee, and some people grabbed the cold cup of drink. And the ones that grabbed the hot cup of coffee, reacted in a way that was more favorable to the person that was doing the interview. And again, it has to do with changing, introducing some ideas. It could be something subliminal, really, and it's more like a persuasive way to introduce something in your mind that makes you take a certain action. So when you put on it, well, so the subtle things, basically, that it triggers your behavior. That's what it is. So I wanted to show you, let me just show you one example here. So when I mentioned that when I attended this event at Tony Robbins, he introduced this concept of priming, and he has a routine, a ritual that he's calling a priming exercise. And for me, it was helpful because once you have something that you can name and you can have it into a structure, a routine, I think for me, it's easier to do. So he calls it a priming exercise, but then when I looked into it further, it's really the basic concept of priming, but he has some steps that he puts into the exercise. It was very, very helpful for me because I do this every morning, and it basically consists of the following. It's 5 steps. The first step has to do with breathing. It's a breathing exercise. And by the way, I'm going to leave a link to the actual video of the priming exercise. It's about 10 to 15 minutes. So I'll put a link in the description after the show. But the first step is a breathing exercise. And it's a heavy, heavy breathing exercise that you do a couple of repetitions. And I think that the point of this exercise of breathing, it helps you with the your oxygen level, and it just brings you, it has an effect, a physiological effect. So there's a breathing exercise. And then the next step is you get into this visualization of, you visualize and yourself of something that you are very grateful for. So basically you go through basically a gratitude step. What is it that you're grateful for, basically? And you identify 2 or 3 things. They could be your big things, or it could be small things. It doesn't really matter, but the idea is that you get into the feeling and the emotion of how it feels when you are grateful for whatever you're thinking about. So you spend a couple of minutes in that gratitude step, and again you're recalling what are you most grateful for, and you really, really feel it. You close your eyes and you kind of put yourself in that state. The next step is visualizing outcomes already achieved. Now, I talked about visualizing outcomes in my previous episode, and so it's being used in this step. And it's basically you have an outcome and you visualize yourself as you already achieved it. How does it feel? And then you ask yourself, how does it feel now that you achieved this particular outcome, this particular goal? And that feeling is very important. So a couple of those outcomes, where you go through this priming exercise, and you internalize the feeling of achieving that outcome. The next step is basically you're sharing with others, and gets into more like a spiritual aspect of the exercise. No matter what you believe in, God, the universe, whatever it is, basically it's kind of like a meditation. You visualize yourself like getting like a light that goes into your body, goes down to your body, and then goes out and up in the sky. So it goes through your body and goes up. So this is step number 4. And then the next step is that you celebrate. You basically share with others what you experience, and you want to basically share the joy that you're experiencing, because after all of these positive things, these are all good things, right? So you're internalizing all of this. So after this, you're pumped. This is about 10 to 15 minutes going through this, and there's a rhythm. Like, I'm going fast, I'm saying it fast here, but it goes slow. You're pacing yourself, and you basically go and you exercise, and you share it with others, and you're very positive. So it's all a positive experience. So this is very, very Um, Patrick, welcome.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it, Fernando.
Thank you for being here, Patrick. So Patrick, I'm very interested in this topic, and like I said, I learned about priming, but I didn't really make the connection until recently from what you you explained in one of your videos. Now, before I get into that, can you tell me a little bit more about yourself? I know that you have a podcast, you have some videos, a YouTube channel. How is that going? Can you share with us a little bit about that?
Sure. So the a lot of that just started off as kind of a passion project. I've been working as a therapist for about a decade now, and full time. I started an online private telehealth practice earlier this year, and that's been fun. But I got into blogging, I would say, about a year ago, and that kind of led into podcasting as I learned more about it. I'm a big podcast addict myself, so learning from people like Pat Flynn got me into that. And then, of course, I ventured into YouTube recently. And so they all kind of complement each other. But the real drive behind these avenues has been part of my frustration as a therapist, knowing that there are a lot of coping skills, a lot of knowledge that we can impart that I don't necessarily think should be reserved just for the therapeutic environment, because a lot of people already have trouble accessing care, or they, by the time they seek help, they've been in crisis for 6 weeks, and it's going to be another 3 months before they get an appointment. And so it's really hard for people to get traction quickly. And of course, the podcast, YouTube channel, these are not meant to replace therapy by any means, but really just to complement and augment people's mental health in general and quality of life. And so I just, I find it fun, and anything I can do to help impart a little bit of what I know and package it in a way that's digestible, is my aim.
Awesome. And what part of the world are you joining us from?
I'm in greater Los Angeles area, so the San Gabriel Valley. So like a stone's throw from LA, not too far.
Okay, West Coast. So with the time change, is this still 3 hours difference?
Yeah, it's 3 hours apart.
I'm on the East Coast.
Okay. 4:15 my time. Yeah.
Okay. Oh. So one question I had right from the get-go. Can you explain to me what is the difference between psychotherapists and cognitive behavioral therapists? What?
Sure. And I get these questions a lot from people who are, new clients and not really even familiar with mental health in general. As they ask, what's the difference between even a psychiatrist and a psychologist, right? So we know that a psychiatrist is a medical doctor. They can prescribe medications. A psychologist is a licensed therapist at the PhD level or PsyD level. A therapist can be an MFT, a marriage and family therapist. It can be an LCSW. That's what I am, a licensed clinical social worker. And that's kind of like the most common you'll find across states, even internationally. And there's LPCs, which I haven't really seen around these parts, California. But I know they have them elsewhere. And so there's different types of counselors, licensed therapists. But a cognitive behavioral therapist is someone who's certified in what's called an evidence-based practice. And so depending on what you're seeking treatment for, you might seek a different specialist. And so evidence-based practices are just kind of how the treatment is packaged and approved through trials and research that says this is efficacious for this problem, right? So CBT has been proven to be effective in things for depression, anxiety, trauma, OCD, and there's certain kind of denominations, if you were, of CBT kind of that are tailored toward that disorder. Whereas someone with PTSD might see someone who's certified in EMDR or brain spotting, as opposed to CBT. And so depending on what your struggle is, you'll want to find a therapist who's specialized in that evidence-based practice.
Got it. So with regards to the topic that we have today, and I mentioned the priming, and I know that it involves a lot of thinking positive thoughts, really thinking about I talked about gratitude, visualizing outcomes, but there's a lot of, I guess, head trash as an opposite to the positive things that we have to kind of sift through. So how can somebody identify these healthy thoughts when they're overwhelmed with what's happening around them in the world?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. That's actually at the very root of what CBT is geared around, is to address this stinking thinking, if you were. So yeah, like the trash mindset, so basically, we're inundated with things that are constantly competing for our attention all around us. And that's never going to go away. So like you were saying, that morning ritual of priming your mind is excellent. All of the research points to that, carving out, protecting that time to prime your mind and emotions, to be intentional about your day. The deep breathing, that activates the rest and digest response. The gratitude you were talking about, that is the biofeedback we talk about in therapy. The intention of setting your mindset onto the things that you want, that visualization you were talking about, your goals as if it's already happened, that's called goal pacing in therapy. That's beginning with the end in mind and working backwards, which combats that black and white thinking. And so when we think about negative thoughts or thoughts in general, the first thing in CBT that we try and talk about is understanding that we're not trained to think about our thinking, right? It's just always running, but we aren't really taught to check our thoughts. And there's this phrase in cognitive behavioral therapy. It's called catch it, check it, change it. It's the 3 C's: catch it, check it, change it. And so the first step is to just take notice of your thoughts. And then the second step is to see if they're valid, right? Because oftentimes we have these thoughts and we just assume that they're valid. We give them validity without even, looking under the hood, right, to see if they're based in reality. And the problem with that is that'll elicit oftentimes an emotional response to the thought that plays out in our actions. And so CBT is really looking at training us to identify the thoughts and then labeling those thoughts. And once we get familiar with labeling those thoughts as whether it's mind reading, self-labeling, negative filtering, whatever type of or category of thought that we struggle with, once we get in the habit of identifying it, they're easier to catch. And once we're able to catch them in real time, then we can challenge them. And then we can replace them if they're invalid, or at least come to terms with them if they're not invalid, right?
So in order for us to categorize them, like if I were to start, if I'm trying to identify some thoughts, do I just go about and just kind of remember a day and how the day goes and try to pick something that happened during the day and then put it in a bucket?
Great question. So that's oftentimes, if somebody goes to a counselor, that's one of the first things they're going to start talking about is some form of mood tracking, which is different than like keeping a thought diary, right? Mood tracking is very specific because depending on what you're dealing with, if you have depression, you're most likely focusing more on mood tracking as well as surrounding events and your coping behavior. And so for me, I learned in CBT to use a scale of like 1 to 9. Okay, if 9's your best mood and 1's your worst mood, how was your day? We try to decomplicate it, like declutter it. You know,
Mhm.
people want to like give you decimals and fractions and ranges throughout the day of what's going on. But, you know, you want to keep it quick and clean when we're talking about mood tracking and thought tracking. So it's because then it's easier to identify patterns, right?
Okay.
So if you're dealing with depression and you can just put a number on it for the day, over time, you might realize that Saturdays suck. Why is that? There's something going on, either who you're with or where you are. Something's triggering you or eliciting those thoughts. Now, if we're dealing with something like anxiety, it's a little bit different because rather than doing like just a mood scale, anxiety tends to be rooted in fear of pending concerns. So fear of the future, fear of the self relating to the world. In therapy, we often think about that in like self-concept, my self-image, my self-esteem versus self in context. So that would be like how we relate to the world and how the world relates to us. But if you're an anxious person, you're going to assume that the world is judging you oftentimes, that you're inadequate. And so when we're doing mood tracking with anxiety or thought tracking, the first step is to rate, your intensity of the anxiety and the triggers, right? That's kind of step one. And from there, then you move to identifying your coping behavior. So when I'm anxious, this is what I do, to cope. And from there, you start getting into classifying the thought categories, right? And getting more to that catch it, check it, change it that we're talking about.
Got it. Interesting. Now, I want to ask you something about something that I saw, and maybe you can help me with this. One strategy or technique to put together things that worry you. I heard something about a journal of some type, or is that
worry journal?
A worry journal? Okay, is that what it is? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. It sounds like an oxymoron, doesn't it? I'm asking not to worry, so I give you a worry journal, right? No, the whole concept behind the worry journal is more of a problem-solving journal. And this is because most intrusive thoughts that we have, most anxious thoughts that we have are about pending issues or unaddressed issues, right? And so one of the biggest things people will complain about when they're anxious is insomnia. They'll be like, well, I try to sleep, but my head keeps racing, right? Well, a big reason behind that is kind of what we started off with by talking about how much noise there is around us. There's constant noise in our life and clutter, that demands our attention. And so most people don't create quiet time during the day to reflect. And you were talking about starting the day off that way. That's great. That's your first fruits. That's like this thing. I know it's important, my mindset. So my first fruits are going to priming my mind for the day. But a worry journal is basically a journal where whenever you have an intrusive thought, you're going to jot down verbatim. And it's very important that you write your thought down verbatim, because that's going to tell you what you're afraid of, what the fear is. And the more specific you can be in the details of the thought, the much easier it's going to be to come up with tangible solutions. The more vague something is, even if it's a positive goal, I want to be happy. Well, what does that look like? What is happy? Happy to you is different than happy to me. It's entirely based on context, right? And your value system. So what are you afraid of? I'm afraid I'll never be successful. Well, what does that mean? I'm afraid I'm going to fail in my marriage. Well, what does that mean? What does failure look like for you? So the more specific you can be with your distressful thoughts, the better. But the trick is to not address them right then and there. The trick is to write it down and then put it away and then come back to it during your worry time. Right. So it's more of a brainstorming time, because you're looking at your thought that you wrote down, and then you're just going to bullet point, brainstorm without judgment, because people with anxiety, they tend to judge a lot themselves, their thoughts, good, bad, stupid, but to just kind of brainstorm potential solutions. And then if you have time left in your worry time, then you can start to rate them in terms of viability. Oh, this is a good solution. This is a 10. This is a 8. This is a 2. And then put them in order of priority that you'll try them on, right? With no particular expectation, right?
Okay. Wow. So I I really like that. That just it seems like it's more like a project-based, task-based, that you're setting time aside, you're identifying the tasks with
Mhm.
your worries, you're writing them down and tabling them to deal with them at a particular time where it's just for oh, is that right? That's kind of
Absolutely. And the whole purpose behind that, it's not that we can't problem solve, in the moment. The problem with trying to problem solve in the moment is that that's not the ideal time
you're
because
doing
we
all
have
these other
competing
things.
goals. If I'm at work and my mind's running away with a problem from yesterday about an unresolved issue, it's going to affect my work.
Got it.
And
Yeah.
then guess what? I'm going to have more problems. And that's probably not going to get addressed anyway. I'm just going to worry more about it later. But when we write it down and we commit to a time to really process it and get into a problem solving mode, that also removes us from feeling like a victim. We're taking action, right?
Yeah.
We're being very intentional about how we're addressing it. And that feels empowering. And then that actually helps to repel anxiety, because anxiety is fear based. If we're taking action and we feel like we're doing something tangible, that empowers us, right?
Powerful.
Yeah.
Oh, that's that. Yeah, I really like that. Like me being like business driven is just like anything else. Like this is something else that you want to time block and
Exactly.
deal with it. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So one thing also that I wanted to ask you, the term neuroplasticity, and I've heard that a lot, and I wanted to just get from you. Can you, like in layman terms, what does that mean?
So basically, it just means like the mind isn't fixed. We're not done growing, right? People feel like, well, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, right? But that's not true. All the research on cognitive development or even happiness, when we talk about anxiety and depression, really, we're talking about satisfaction, like life satisfaction, right? All the research that I've seen shows that this idea of neuroplasticity means that we can develop new pathways in the brain, right? In psychology, they're called dendrites. So a dendrite is basically like if you're walking on a trail, right? And you're walking on the beaten path, but then you say, hey, I want to go over here. Like, okay, so you already know you're going to have to do some work to get through the bushes, right? But the more you take that new path, the more you carve that new path, the more it starts to look like a man-made path, right?
Right.
The brain works the same way. The more we turn our mind to something, and in terms of our train of thought, and we attend to a different thought, the less resistance, the less friction our mind is going to give us with going that direction later. Meaning, like, if you say to yourself, I'm a good worker, but you don't really believe it, it feels ingenuine, right? We praise ourselves. If we have depression, that feels very ingenuine. But the more that we repeat that thought and then put action to it, over time, our brain starts to prefer that thought. That's neuroplasticity. It's your mind's ability to change direction of the synapse, of the way we think, our thought patterns, right?
Right. Wow. So I can imagine that the negative effect can also happen if you're thinking of something that you cannot do, or can you learn not to do so? Like if we can learn how to do something, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can learn how to do something wrong or something that you don't want to do, right?
Yes, absolutely. So it is a battle of the mind, right? When we're talking about our behavior, and they're married, we can't really separate them. That's why in CBT, there's really three pillars. There's your thoughts, your mood, and your behavior, right? And we have to kind of address each pillar independently and then find the correlations, because if we think to ourselves, I can't do something, we're already shortchanging ourselves, right? We're already shutting ourselves down, right? Oh, I can't do that, right? But in reality, we can learn new tricks all the time. We can learn new things, but we have to allow ourselves room to explore the how, and put in the time and love ourselves enough to really explore the tangible steps behind it, as opposed to just shutting ourselves down. But it's very much about the language. And in CBT, we talk a lot about adding on to the negative thoughts, yes, but, right? Because that gives a little more wiggle room, right, to the thought. It's like, I failed my marriage, but I learned a lot about what I need to do different next time, right? As opposed to being an absolute statement, because a thought is either one of two things. It's a question or it's a statement. And when it comes to our thoughts, if we can learn to just rephrase our thoughts into questions, it's going to do us a lot of good, because it allows room for being curious, for exploring options. Instead of saying, I can't be an IT developer. I don't know anything about that. I stunk at math, right? As opposed to saying, I wonder how long it would take me to become an IT developer. So it's very different.
Very different.
Very different.
Okay. Wow, this is awesome. Now, Patrick, I know we're just touching the surface of all of this. How can somebody learn more about this if they want to learn more about you? I have your website here. Can you tell me, what can they find on the website? How can they contact you?
Sure. So you can hop over to the mentalhealthtoolbox.com. There you'll see my blog, links to my podcast, the YouTube channel. If you want to just check out the YouTube channel, it's the Mental Health Toolbox. I have, if you go to the Mental Health Toolbox /links, you'll see all of my relevant social links there. If you're curious of any books I recommend, in terms of personal development or tools, you can always hop over to mhtgear.com. That's mhtgear.com. And you'll see a lot of the books that I personally love, around personal development. It's my favorite subject. So big on James Clear and the like, and practical wisdom. So, I'm a Tony Robbins fan myself. And I'm very big on personal development. A lot of what I talk about is learned through my own experience. I'm not talking, just clinically. I'm talking about, the bumps and bruises I've learned in my own journey on personal development. So I know this stuff works. The battle of the mind is something everybody struggles with. And one of the biggest problems with anxiety and anxious thoughts is comparative thinking. We look at somebody else and we say, oh, they have it all figured out. What's wrong with me? Right. But we see people's highlights, not the reels, not the film strip, all of the in-between that people go through to get where they are. So be very careful with comparative thinking. It's a tool that we learn as a kid. That's very effective, because we have to compare things to understand how the world works. But as we get older, it can become a detriment because it can become very skewed. Right.
Okay. Well, that's about all the time we have today. Now, thank you very much, Patrick, for joining us and sharing your knowledge. If you're watching this on the replay, or if you caught this late, go watch the replay. Just to recap, we talked about a little bit of priming exercise, some steps for priming. I'll leave a link on the description of a video for the priming. Then we talked, Patrick talked about neuroplasticity, the worry journal, and other strategies and tips just to identify healthy thoughts. Patrick can be reached on the website we have here on the link, and I'll listen to his podcast as well. Give him a good review. Just listen to it. He has a lot of good stuff going on there. Thank you again, Patrick, for being here. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. My pleasure.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye. Till the next episode of Mindset of Steel. Bye.